The most obvious place to start when talking about tenses is the simple present tense, and that's because it's the form that we're most familiar with. It's the basic tense of where we are right now. So the simple present is your am, is, are for the being, state of being verbs, and the do and does for the action verbs. So these are some of the ideas that we want to talk about. We'll look at some examples of these real soon. The first is that these are general actions, that it's about things that are just the way they are, describing something, describing what a person is or what he does. Second is that these are actions that are habitual, something of a habit like smoking or drinking, or that it occurs in the past, present, and future, that it's beyond the time. It's something that always occurs, not just at one particular point in time. Also, statements that always hold true, like that, gravity pulls things down to the earth, or that earth rotates around the sun, things like that. These are always true. It wasn't just true at some point in the past. It's still true now, and it goes beyond the time. So we'll use the present tense for that. Scheduled future actions also are described in the present tense. It could be described in the future tense with the will happen, but we also use the present tense that something happens in the future as well. And also events in fictional work, like when you're reading a book, anything that you described in the book should be written in the present tense. So if you are writing a school essay about a book that you recently read, you have to describe everything in the present tense. So let's look at some of these examples of these rules here. The first is general actions, like she works in a hospital. So this is kind of a general description of what she does for a living. So she lives here, she lives there, she plays tennis, okay? That's just generally describing that person. Things like that will be described in the present tense. Also, actions that are habitual, things that are habits. He talks too much, you might say, or he smokes too much, he drinks too much. These are just habitual things, and habitual things are also things that occur beyond the past, present, and future. It just happens all the time, and events like that, just like the general statements about a person, we would use the present tense, like this sentence, he lives in California. That's just generally who he is and what he does, and it is not bound by time. It's just in the past and in the future as well. Another rule is that it should be for statements that always hold true, like, that Earth rotates around the sun. So let's consider this sentence here. Galileo claimed that the Earth orbits the sun. So in this sentence, we're talking about some event that happened years and years ago, hundreds of years ago, so that's definitely in the past. Galileo, when he said this, that was in the past. But what he said, that something is the case, in this part, we have to say that the Earth orbits the sun, because it's still true today. This is something that hasn't changed over that time. If Galileo had said that my house burned down, that's an event that is locked into time in the past. So we would say Galileo claimed that his house burned down in the past tense. But when we have a true fact that doesn't change, we'll use the present tense for that. Scheduled future action. Actions that are scheduled, like train schedule, airline schedule, also movie times, things of that nature that will take place in the future, but we know about the schedule. We know exactly when it will happen. Then we'll use the present tense to talk about it. We don't have to. We could say the train will arrive in the future tense, will arrive at 5 p.m., but we have the option of saying the train arrives at 5 p.m. So this is an option that's left to you. And you have to remember that this is only for scheduled events, whereas if you're talking about a personal event, it's Not 100%, but it's more likely that you're going to use the present progressive tense, which we'll look at later. That is the I am doing something, like I'm going to China tomorrow. Am going is for something of the present right now, but we'll say that for future actions when it's a personally scheduled event. Events in fictional work. When you talk about Romeo and Juliet, you would not say that Romeo died or Juliet died. You would say that Romeo dies and Juliet dies in the end of the story. You got to use the present tense. So in all your school essays, make sure you're writing the present tense to talk about what happens in the book. And the logic behind that is that the book events are not locked into our time. It existed in the past and it exists now and also in the future. And so we got to talk about them in the present tense to show that infinity. Whereas if you look at the example sentence here, we could say either of these. In the book of Genesis, Noah builds an ark in the present tense, or you might say that Noah built an ark. And both of these may be valid depending on who you are and what you believe in. If you believe that Noah was a real person because you're a Christian or you're Jewish, then you would take the events of the Bible literally and you believe that this is a historical event, then you would say Noah built an ark because I know this is an event of history in past time. But if you consider the book of Genesis a work of literature and you think of it as just fictional work, then all the events in there are just like Romeo and Juliet. It's just literature, fiction. Then you would use the present tense, Noah builds the ark. When we consider the tense diagram and how the tense fits into this, the present tense is marked C here with a marking here, but it's not necessarily at this particular point. This is actually, if you were looking at that specific point, it would be more the present progressive. I am doing something right now. But to say that something happens is kind of a time period like that. It kind of goes from the past to the future. It's this general overall time. It's like all the time. That's the present tense. So when you use the present, don't lock yourself into any one particular point. It's just kind of universal, always and all the time.